Well, January is Mentorship Month, and over the next few weeks, we're going to be introducing you to some incredible people and organizations who are doing some powerful work. To kick things off, I want to introduce you to a mentor of my own in my life. He's also my father, Dan Frost. Dan is a senior associate with the International Foundation in Washington, D.C., and works in a unique role that carries an impact across the nation. He's a mentor to members of Congress and their staff. Dad, thanks for coming. It's good to see you here.
It's kind of strange to be in this position, but I'm great.
Bring your dad to work day, apparently. So
glad to be here.
So I think what you do is really interesting because I think a lot of times people look at mentoring as like something you do with children or something that you do with students, but you're actually a mentor to leaders of this nation.
It is a unique position. My wife, Lori, and I have been doing it for 23 years. And we have the rare privilege of being invited into the private lives of very public people. And through those relationships that are formed, it's a ministry capacity. And we come alongside these guys. They're just like regular people, like you and me. They have all the same issues of marriage and children and finances. And they need somebody that can kind of walk through and that they can trust. And so I get to do that. In a sense, it is a mentoring position.
So I got to say, these folks probably don't have a lot of people that they can confide in. And so I'm assuming that trust that you have with them is pretty significant. How did you build that?
Well, it's taken time. You have to build trust in anything, even in a relationship. I think a big part of mentoring is to build that trust between you and the mentee. And that's happened by word of mouth of one trusted person introduces me to another member of Congress and says, you can trust this guy. What you talk about won't show up on the evening news.
Yes, I understand. It's one of those places where if you're in the news, that might not be a good thing.
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit. I know there's a mentor of Congress that went through something very significant. Congressman Don Young from Alaska. He recently passed away, but you had a voice in his life.
Yeah, Don was one of the oldest members in Congress at the time. In fact, he was. He came into the administration back with Nixon and had been a congressman ever since. We both came down with prostate cancer. And all of a sudden we were in a club that nobody wants to join, but we were in it and we were able to have this dialogue about things both spiritually, physically, treatment-wise, and we really built a bond and a friendship through that. And I think in mentoring, I think one of the things you try to do is to find common ground. You can just spew out information and that's all it is. But if you have a relationship and you build that, then you find those contact points, much more of what you do is going to be received.
That's so interesting. Another member of Congress that actually ties you back here to Central Illinois is another member who passed not too long ago, but Congressman Tim Johnson.
Yeah.
You guys were also very close.
Tim was a very good friend. I had the privilege of officiating at his funeral. Sadly, he did pass away a little over a year ago. But we used to get together for dinner every Tuesday night up on the Hill when they were in session, and Tim became a good friend. And Tim was a Republican, and he invited a good friend of his, which was a Democrat. And the three of us would have dinner every Tuesday night, and we'd talk a little bit about sports, we'd talk a little bit about politics. I'd stay out of that part of it. And then I would do my, quote, mentoring piece, which was usually sharing a thought that centered around the life and the principles of Jesus.
Now, there's two things that you said there. One is that Tim was obviously Republican, but you guys would meet with a fellow Democrat in Congress, but also you mentioned that it's sports and other things that you would talk about. So I need you to tell me, is this is a nonpartisan thing?
Yes.
But it's also, you're not a lobbyist. You're not trying to convince them to vote a certain way.
I would say the closest explanation would be I'm a spiritual advisor. But I just come alongside these guys. Like I said, there's a great need for this. And it really, to me, it doesn't matter if they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever. I think we all have the basic needs. And if I can meet those, all the better.
And it doesn't matter which side of the aisle that you're on. We all need help. For folks here in Central Illinois that maybe haven't been to D.C. or we typically just see what's out there in the news, what is it that you like to share based on your experience on the Hill, having interacted with these people for decades?
Well, if I can go from personal, when I first heard about what I was going to be doing in Washington, D.C., I thought I was going to be working with just a bunch of you know, people that didn't have a lot of good news. And what I found out, there's some great people up there. They're trying to do a good job on both sides of the aisle. And, you know, hopefully I play a part in that. And through my mentoring impacts them, which impacts our nation.
All right, Dad, so another thing that ties you here to Central Illinois is your background as an athlete. You were a Big Ten MVP.
You're going to go there?
I'm going to go there. Nobody wants to hear this, but you played at the University of Iowa. But your last collegiate career game was much closer to here.
Yeah, we played the University of Illinois. At that time, it was called Assembly Hall. It's still there, but it's, what is it, State Farm?
It's the State Farm Center now, yes.
Yeah. And, you know, playing in the Big Ten was a lot of fun. In fact, that was one of the reasons I probably connected with Tim Johnson, the congressman from here, was because of his love for sports. And we built a good relationship through that.
That's so interesting. I know that sports, and you also have a business background. You worked in finance for a number of years. I know over the years, just watching you in your ministry and your work in D.C., that you tend to connect a lot with people over sports and business. Is that how you build trust, or what is, you know, you don't go in saying, hey, I'm here to help you. You know, you kind of go in and you build a friendship first.
Exactly. I think the main way that you get introduced to these people is to find a common ground. I always say everybody has a button on them, and if you push the right button, you'll make a connection. And so if it's sports, you find that button. If it's finances, you find that button. Things that I've done in my past that there are common ground with them, it's amazing how then when they connect, and then through that, you start having conversations, you start talking about life, and life will always bring forth problems eventually of some type that need to be talked about.
So it's really connecting in a similar place, building that place of comfort, and then do they come to you when they have a problem, or is it something you look for and you reach out, or? Both.
Sometimes I read something in the paper that somebody has just gone through something, and I'll stop by the office, I might drop a card, say I'm available if you want to talk. Other times it's a fellow member saying, hey, so-and-so is going through this situation, I think it'd be good if you had a conversation with them, and they'll set it up. So it happens both ways, but again, I think the central thing is, like I say, is I bring me into the conversation, but I am there because I bring a spiritual impact in the conversation, and that is the reality of Jesus working in each of our lives.
Let's talk a little bit about the change or the results, if you will, that you see in people over the years, because it sounds like this is a long-term deal that you have going on. This isn't like, hey, we meet for a couple weeks and you know, suddenly you're better. Our country would be truly a different place if that were true. But
I mean, I can talk about multiple people that have been impacted. One of the people that comes to mind immediately, just retired, used to be a congressman, Jim Inhofe from Oklahoma, then became a senator, and through our organization was challenged to look at Africa. And so he took a trip to Africa and fell in love with the continent, and made, I think, 144 visits to different countries over the next 15, 20 years, impacting him in a positive way, both from a message of his faith, but also his message as a senator representing the United States.
And what is the key thing that really triggered him to start moving in that direction?
He was challenged by a guy named Doug Coe, who headed up our organization for years. He was in Time magazine as the stealth evangelical, because what we do is pretty private. We get accused of being secretive, which we really aren't. We're just trying to uphold the relationships and keep them confidential. But he was challenged to say, hey, why don't you think about impacting something outside of this little small city here, D.C., think of globally. And so he was challenged to think of Africa, and he finally accepted a trip to go there and just look. He almost begrudgingly did it, but once he got there and saw the impact he could have on a nation that had great needs, he fell in love with it and just started going all the time. And one of the things I think is, you know, you impact people individually with what you do, but you also impact this country with what we do. You take Senator Inhofe, he goes there and builds these relationships with heads of states in a unique way. And, you know, usually the State Department's there and they want to have the whole table full of people. He'd clear out the room and he'd meet with this prime minister, this premier, this, you know, whoever it was, the head of state, and he'd say, just you and I. And they'd talk about life. Tell me about your family. Tell me about your kids. How hard is it to rule this nation? And he would build these relationships that other nations were trying to come in and want to take the place of the United States as far as a friend. And he was loved by our military because he kept so many of the relationships in Africa in connection with the United States.
That's incredible. It's stuff that you typically don't hear about in the news.
No, doesn't make the news.
And that's on purpose. You guys are very private with your organization. Now, something that is more public about what you guys do is the National Prayer Breakfast.
Yes.
That's attended by the president every year.
Yeah. It started back when Eisenhower was president, and he was commenting to a senator from Kansas, his home state, Carlson, and he said, "The White House is the loneliest place I've ever lived." And Senator Carlson says, "Well, we have some friends that gather together once a week for prayer. Why don't you come?" Well, word got out that the president wasn't going to come, so they decided, well, let's have something. And Conrad Hilton said, well, we'll have a hotel. And next thing you knew, you had a whole group of senators meeting with President Eisenhower for a prayer breakfast, and out of that was birthed the National Prayer Breakfast, and every president has come and attended ever since. That's
amazing. And I'm sure that's a lot of people from around the world gather for that. It's definitely faith-based. Faith plays a huge role in the work that you do.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for that. I mean, I really believe that we all have a God-shaped vacuum inside of each of us that's looking to be filled in some way. And I think the way to best fill it, from my own personal experience, is an experience with Jesus Christ.
Now, what separates you from, a pastor or a chaplain and, more mentor-focused work?
Well, one, I don't have a church. I don't, on Sundays, have a sermon that I have to give. My church, I guess, without a building, would be Capitol Hill. And I refer to it all the time as my ministry as MOA, and it's the ministry of walking around.
MOA, the ministry of walking around. I like that.
and just, you can say serendipitously or divinely, I run into people and have these amazing encounters. One time, my wife Lori and I, we were walking down the hall. A member just came out of a debrief of some stuff that was happening in the Middle East as far as terrorism, and he was ashen. As we saw him, we said, "Are you okay?" He goes, "No, I'm not really. The stuff I heard is shaking me up pretty good." And we said, "Hey, can we pray for you?" And my wife Lori and I, just right there on the spot, prayed for this member of Congress. And he grabbed our arms and he said, "Thank you so much. You have no idea what that means to me." And those are the types of things, you can't plan those. It's got to be available.
And it just happens.
It just happens.
It's incredible. Well, it's a ministry, it's a job that affects the people at the highest level in our nation, and essentially affects us here at home. And so appreciate what you're doing, Dad. And it's really neat to hear some of the behind the scenes
Thank you.
of what you do up there. And yeah, we've been talking with Dan Frost, my father, who has a ministry up in Washington, D.C. With the International Foundation, where he works with members of Congress and their staff.